everyone, you are tuning into the Absorbcast, and today we have a special guest. We are featuring Jessica Cogswell, who is an executive director. She has an incredible history in the design industry. I met her about a year ago at a company called Room Health. We were both executives at this kind of new startup type company. But Jess has, again, an incredible background in both the design and executive leadership industry. And today we are going to be talking about team culture, and particularly creative team culture, and how that affects your company, your deliverables, and what your creative teams are capable of. Let's get into it. Right, so Jess, tell me a little bit about your background and your experience in the creative industry.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. So I actually started off my career in a little bit of an interesting way. So I was in school for game art and design, and it kind of dawned on me. I was like, gosh, I really need an internship just somewhere. And so I found this nonprofit, and they were just getting started. And so I would commute from like Pawtucket, Rhode Island to Walpole, Massachusetts every single day and work out of this woman's house. And it was just the founder, me, an intern, and another intern. And I was like, just kind of executing these really kind of basic designs for some lesson plans. So the company is called GEF, or Green Education Foundation. And their whole goal was to kind of educate kids from grades K through 12 on like how good earthworms are and how to treat our environment. And it was so great. Well, anyway, so this organization was brand new. And the interesting thing was that we had no funding. And so eventually, myself and the other intern, who she was actually kind of like a retired school teacher. We somehow landed a really big grant, which 14 years ago, $500,000 was like a pretty good amount of money. And so we landed this grant, and like Home Depot was just like really interested in us. So that's where we got the grant from. And so eventually we were able to get an actual office space. And this was way before remote work was a thing. Like that wasn't even really an option for anyone. And then pretty much overnight, I was still in school for game art design. And I all of a sudden was an art director. And I was like, okay, fabulous, let's do this thing. And so the founder, she was like, Jess, we've got a lot of things going on, so you're going to need a team, but we have we don't have a budget for you to actually hire anyone. So I basically, kind of took the resources that I had, and I was able to create this entire like art department for this nonprofit of really talented and incredibly, just incredible people from like Mass Art and Brisdy. And it was actually really funny because I was going into this position. I was, 21 years old. And there were people interning for me that had their master's degree in fine art. And I was like, I don't even have my bachelor's yet. So, but let me like teach you something that I probably don't even know myself. But anyway, so long story short, it was honestly the first time, I got the chance to meet some incredible people. And I also, as kind of my position unfolded there, and I was able to kind of help bring some creative people out of their shell and give them the confidence that they were really lacking to like be themselves, that was it for me. And I was like, man, this is exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life. I just want to work with creative people, and I want to help them, see how really incredible they are, because a lot of people, especially in the creative field, they're giving their whole heart and soul into their work, and that's pretty vulnerable. And a lot of people are very, kind of introverted about that. So anyway, I started with that. And then eventually I landed at a studio, and we were doing, it was kind of a really strong juxtaposition because I went from the nonprofit world to a very for-profit marketing world. And we were doing ads for, I think one of our first projects was actually for Disney, and we did an augmented reality sort of thing for Inside Out. Um, and I remember the first time like going into the Disney Slack channel, and I was like, I am too nervous to even say anything here. But so yeah, so there I spent about 6 years, and I I just again worked with some incredible people. Um and I went from there to a little bit of a different marketing space, so B2B rather than B2C. And then of course I ended up at Room, which was in-house. So it was only my second in-house, but it was obviously very, very different from my first in-house. And now I found myself back in the marketing space. So that's kind of the career trajectory. I've kind of done a lot of it, and have been in a lot of really exciting projects, and kind of have run the gambit.
Yeah, that's a very interesting career path, and it's cool to hear that someone had experience from that sort of internship level, and it sounds like you immediately went into leadership while you were still in that internship position. So tell me a little bit about your leadership positions in addition to all of this.
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, the first leadership position that I had that I was really, I mean, I was definitely, getting my bearings by the end of my position with GEF. But really, the first position that I was in, that proper leadership position, was at Grid Panda. And I, went from art director to senior art director. But I eventually absorbed really all of the duties of the company, like, billing and talking to our clients, and I kind of everything, also overseeing the development department. Um, and then it just kind of translated from there. So I started, as an art director, went to senior art director, and then I grew from there to creative director at one of my previous positions. And then, of course, Room, I was VP of design, and I'm a VP of creative strategy now. So it's kind of like I would say that's probably the only actual linear element of my career, is just like there's a linear aspect there. So.
Yeah, so in your experience, how much, I think of how to ask this, how much of your team or company culture influenced like the quality of work that either you or your team has been able to produce in various aspects? So you can, relate to specific companies if you want to, or just kind of an overall idea of, how does that culture kind of impact what you're able to produce in a creative field?
Oh gosh, 1,000%. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind, and there never has been, that actual culture, not a veil of a culture, but actual culture impacts especially creatives 1,000%. Um, especially I feel like in the creative teams, but not just in the creative teams, and any team really. If if your people, if just the people that are actually, hands on and working on those things that are so valuable to a company, if they don't feel like they're supported, if they don't feel like there's a really clear growth path, if they don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm just overwhelmed, I need to take a day off, and but they actually feel comfortable to take that day off, if they don't feel like they're able to come to somebody, whether it's a team member or a leader, if they don't feel like they're able to come to somebody and say, "Man, I'm having a really hard time. Either I'm having a creative block, or this client is not treating me well, or this client has an issue." If that culture piece isn't there where they actually feel like they're taken care of, I mean, you'll notice a stark difference between the actual quality of the creative that they're putting out and the quality that they might not be, if the culture is just not, doesn't actually have a foundation and something real to base it off of.
Yeah, I've certainly noticed that in my experience too. So, when I was young designer. I still consider myself young in my, professional growth here, but in relative terms, I guess. When I was still in design school, I was working an internship that turned to a part-time job and then a full-time job, and it was in the medical communication space. And this particular company, like I was on a salary basis whenever I kind of went on full-time, but that meant I wasn't getting overtime pay. And at this point in time, from business perspective, they were putting all of the hours on the person that cost the least for their company. They also put a lot of client expectations and just responsibilities on my shoulders that I wasn't prepared for at that point. And so for me, I really saw that I was supposed to be a graphic designer in that position. And when I'm working, 70 or so hours a week, and I have meetings and I have deliverables and things that I'm supposed to give to clients, I couldn't meet those expectations because I was so burnt out in such a very short amount of time. And this was at again a medical communications company, so an agency. And in that space, it's all about client, it's always about what the client wants. And, that's something that we're trying to kind of shift the focus on at Absorb. We want to really focus on that sort of work-life balance because we do believe that if you really have a positive impact in the culture that you're building within your company, then your clients are going to be happier because you can provide higher quality work. So in your experience, what does that work-life balance look like for, a team culture, and how does that impact the actual deliverables that your clients, or, if you're working in-house, the deliverables that you can give as a creative team?
Well, I think that's a fabulous question, and to your point too, burnout culture is something that is so detrimental to a creative human. I mean, there's one thing to live in a burnout culture and not be in that creative space where you really draw what you're about to do or what you're working on from your mental sanity in a lot of ways. And people have got to have that ability to have that space in their mind where they're, like you said, they're not worried about, oh my God, if I don't get this landing page done in a day, I don't know, I might be in trouble. Or, if I don't get this campaign out the door, I don't know what I'm going to do. If that ulterior noise is going on and, the creative team members are working 70 hours a week, that is no longer a creative position. That position is a project management, account management, and execution position. It's not creative. And so, you know, what balance is to me is exactly what it says. It's not like a lot of companies, just for me personally, I'm going to be completely transparent. A lot of companies will say, we appreciate balance here. But you also find people working 80 hours a week. Well, that's not balance. That is in fact the antithesis of balance. What balance is coming in to work and feeling like I'm ready for this. I want to be here. I have space to create the things I need to create. Balance isn't working 80 hours a week and then saying, well, take as much time off as you need. Well, that doesn't matter, right? Because that person isn't going to be able to take that time off. Creative balance or work-life balance is having a team that is able to take a Friday off, take a couple days off, and not have that worry in their back of their minds like, oh my gosh, I know there's going to be so much happening without me here. I know I'm going to have to catch up. And the whole time that they're taking that space for their necessary mental well-being and their necessary just elements to be a human, if they're worried about that in the background, they're actually not taking any time off. That is not a mental break. That's just a day not looking at the computer screen. So for me, balance looks like having creative humans show up and actually be able to, execute on what fulfills them and makes them happy. And they're really, really, kind of proud about what they put out. Not saying that there's not going to be hard times. Like there's always going to be deliverables, no matter if it's an in-house or an agency, there's always going to be deliverables that are going to be in a tight budget or a tight schedule. Um, but balance is that mental freedom of disconnecting for a couple of days or coming into work and being able to work a normal 8-hour shift and not feeling like the immense pressure and overburdening of I don't know what's going to happen if I take this day off and show up, and so many things have happened in the background.
Yeah, and something that I've seen too is a lot of companies will they will put out perks that they say are, oh, we have this internal culture, and just one of the things that I've seen is unlimited PTO. It's like, well, is it truly unlimited? Like, can you actually take PTO anytime you want? For one, does it still have to be approved? And two, are you going to be looked down upon if you actually use that perk? Those are things
Uh-huh.
that, if you have to actually question that, that's not a good culture. That is masking something to attract talent. Um,
Uh-huh.
so in our experience working together at Room Health, I saw you shape in a whole design department's team culture within a high stress, extremely high stressed and very fast paced environment. But you, as the VP of design, you were able to create a culture within this company while also shaping the company's, brand, mission, vision, values, the company culture in addition to that. So tell me about, that process and why you felt like you needed to create kind of a unique culture within the design department there.
Well, that's a great question. And by the way, thank you for that. It's very kind. Very very appreciate that. You know, I think so. So just attacking the actual creative department itself. The and I will forever believe this. The one thing that has served me the best throughout my entire career is not just saying that I put people first, but actually putting people first. Um, and what that looks like to me is creating an environment, especially for creatives, where they feel like, again, they're doing something that means something to them, that they're not just there to go into Figma and execute a wireframe that doesn't mean anything to them, that they actually connect with the people around them. And that's that's an element that I've been lucky enough to be able to live in for a long time, is that remote environment. And a lot of times I'm a huge component for remote environments, but uh, component? That's not right. Proponent? I'll say that again. I I love remote environments. And but it is sometimes hard, right? To get like people to connect to each other, especially people that are pretty much by default somewhat introverted. So building that sense of community is really, really important, but also, being able to kind of talk about the hard stuff together, is important. And having space and time, like in the team's calendar, to actually just talk about things, to learn more about each other. And so with Broom, when I was hired, I was the only person that was in the team. And, I was kind of immediately like, okay, well, it's time to hire. And so I had the really fantastic opportunity to be able to sit with exactly how I wanted to build the team. There wasn't one there before. So I was able to pull in some folks that were just incredible from my past. I have two artists that I don't know how I would ever part ways with them. And they were credible. I was able to kind of pull them in almost immediately. And we were able to kind of shape not just the kind of overall company's mission, vision, and values, but we also decided to make our own, our own creative team mission, vision, and values. And we decided what was important to us. So this may come as a shock, but kindness is number one, right? Kindness towards yourself and towards other people is number one. If you are acting in an unkind way, we might have to have a conversation, because if you need some time off, you got to take some time off. But it was very, very important to me as the person that was lucky enough to shape this department, to do it in the right way and to have people come on board that weren't, bought into any kind of random extracurricular like unlimited PTO. In fact, in Room, just for full transparency, we did not have unlimited PTO, and I still gave my team unlimited PTO. In fact, I mandated that they take a mental wellness day every month at least. Um, so it was really important to me that anybody that chose to work with our team felt not just that they were a part of something bigger, um, but that they were respected and that whatever it was that they wanted to do. So we had a couple people that just were so interested in UX, but they didn't have the background. That's when I sent them your way. And I was like, hey, here's this incredible VP of web services. And, she has, and I've told them, I was like, she can tell you exactly about how Disney has evolved their user experience. And so that was important, and I hope that, at least I hope that folks felt that way. But, you know, building Room's foundational structure, that was actually kind of a funny one. Um, me and a couple other folks were kind of in this Room planning session when, COVID Clinic was transferring to Room. And I actually had to fight a little bit to identify the company's mission, vision, and values. And that's a little bit based off of the fact that, COVID Clinic was erected from such a pandemic, and everyone just kind of threw everything together. But we were actually planning this thing. And I'm like, guys, we need foundational structures in order to not just get, our employee buy-in, but we also need something to work off of. We need something for our clients to buy into. Why do we exist? It's not just to make profit. It shouldn't ever be just to make profit. There's a reason that we're here. And so, building that was actually an incredible experience, because for the first time in my professional career of running those mission, vision, and values workshops, generally speaking, when you get a lot of chief officers in the room, they'll have radically different ideas, and they'll be like, well, we want to go this route, or we want to go this route. They'll generally never align. For the first time, though, everyone's did really align super closely. And that was such a great, experience, because that was even easier to kind of shape those foundational pillars. But yeah, I mean, having things like that to work off of, and being very authentic about it, that is so important.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to take a step back and reference the Disney thing for any of our audience members that may not actually know us. So when Jess and I first met, Room Health, the company that we were working at together, flew us both out to California. And what we were doing was we were leading a sort of pie in the sky strategy sort of session for what do we want Room Health to be with all of our executives. So Jess and I were both vice presidents. It was all the other vice presidents and the C-suite members at this company that all came together for this. And Jess and I worked on that workshop together. And when we got to California, Jess ever so kindly offered for me to take the lead. And I said, absolutely not. I do not want to speak in front of anyone. And so Jess took the lead there. I took the notes, and we sent everything out. We had like this whole Fig Jam thing prepped for everyone to participate in and all of that. But in that trip, they sent us to California, Disneyland at this point, and that was like the first time that Jess and I actually met. Like, we had known each other for 2 days, I think, at this point, and we were sent off to Disneyland together to walk around, and we had a super fun experience. But I started nerding out because I had done a whole presentation previously on the history of UX, and Disney was a big factor in that. So it was all kind of fresh in my mind, and as we were walking around, I think I was maybe ruining the magical experience of Disneyland, because I was pointing out all the things they do to make visitors feel welcome in their parks. So that was our fun little story of how Jess and I first met at Disneyland. But aside from that, so, building out that team culture at Room, I think a lot of the reason that that sort of mission, vision, and values effort undertaking, I guess, went so well was because we did have that first workshop out in California when they flew us out there. We had that sort of first workshop together, so everyone kind of knew this general idea of where we wanted the company to go, and a lot of that was able to be influenced in the mission, vision, and values work that you put together. Um, but back to your actual design team within Room, how did you take your team's feedback into account when you were establishing your team culture?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So, um, feedback is the most important thing that you can ever get as a leader, because making decisions in a silo or just kind of assuming how people are, dealing with things or liking things, that has never historically worked out, at least for me. Every time I kind of had an idea, or, had an idea for the brand, or had an idea for the workshop, or had an idea for the team itself, I would always kind of ask, hey, what do you guys think about this? And generally speaking, especially if your team, if they're comfortable with you and they're like, oh, I know I can say that this is the ridiculous idea and it will be fine. If the team ever came back where they're like, well, I'm not so sure about this, then as a leader, I really want to listen to that. Feedback. It was once told to me that feedback is a gift, and we can either choose to accept it or not. And so I always think that feedback is a gift. And so, every time we were to roll out a new process, or we were to roll out, even when we were shaping our team's, values structure, it was always so important to ask, the existing team members, how, do you like this? Or do you think we just need to scrap it? Because if we need to scrap it, that's fine. We can scrap it. Um, but feedback is definitely so important. I mean, even just sending out, I kind of I don't love the use of like surveys for everything, but even just sending out like a little survey, like, hey, you know, do you like the way that our team values are right now? Is there anything you would change? Or just asking people, even better. I would have, regardless of org structure, I would have one-on-ones with every single member of my team every week. Um, just to check in and see how they were doing and see if there was anything that I could help them with. And I would use that time to say, hey, by the way, I might be thinking about this thing. What do you think about this? And I'll always know if it's a bad idea, because they'll be like, I'm not sure. And I'll be like, yep, never mind. Let's work on something else.
So, I definitely saw at Room at least. Well, okay, let me jump back a little bit too. So, in my team at Room, I was leading the web services team, so I was responsible for all of the digital properties within Room Health and COVID Clinic at the time, which was a sort of sister company from Room. Um, and so when I had to expand my team and I was hiring for new roles, Jess, you had sent me, you had said, oh, my team grew, so quickly. You were able to bring in so many other people, but you had a whole welcome packet of, you had a slideshow presentation, you had a Google Drive folder of these are our team values, this is our culture, these are the perks that everyone gets from being on the design team and working together. And you had all of this laid out in a presentation for your new team members to come in on like their first day or their first week, whatever it was, just to kind of get situated. And you offered that for my team as well. And I remember seeing that and thinking like, how do you have the time for this? in addition in addition to everything else. Um but I really did see after, working so closely with you and your team for so long in that position, I really saw that you did truly value feedback from your team members. And that was kind of a stark contrast to some other teams that we saw inside of Room as well, where the executives that were kind of leading some different teams wouldn't always take feedback into account, and they thought that because they were in a leadership position, they knew better than some of the people that were working hands on these things. And for me, having kind of an outside perspective of, I was in a position where I could collaborate with a lot of different people at Rome. And so for me, I was able to really see a very stark contrast between the culture that you built and the type of results that you were getting from your team versus some other teams that we were working with there. But I'm curious, from your perspective, how did you see a shift in your internal team and the work that they were able to produce based off of the culture that you were able to create for them?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to the initial idea, of putting people for me personally, putting people that I have the honor of leading first, and that isn't a situational thing, right? It's not situational. You can't say, well, I put my people first as long as it doesn't come from the CEO, or I put people first as long as the deliverable doesn't come from a client. it, there's no situational changes there. It's always putting your people first. There were times that I had to push back on the CEO many times. There were times I had to push back on our chief officers and say, we're not going to do this way. Um, and that was never an issue, because they respected me. That was good. Um, but there there definitely, I agree with you. There definitely was a stark contrast. And I think it really does come down to, having a team that feels like their leader has kind of got their back, right? So if something comes in and the deliverable is just too quick, for them to, instead of suffer like silently and be like, I'm never going to hit this, I'm going to have to stay and work until 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., they would come to that leadership position and say, I don't know what to do here. Um, that is the epitome of somebody feeling supported. They don't have to suffer alone. They don't have to figure things out alone. And also being somebody that cares about that. I think that there's definitely a new age of executive leadership, and that executive leadership is kind, and they're able to listen to their team's feedback, and they're able to also say, I probably don't know the best way to go about this, so let's figure it out together. I mean, I would say 30 years ago, an executive had to show up in a suit and act like they know everything. And the truth is nobody does. It doesn't matter if you're a chief officer or VP level or CEO. Nobody knows anything. But the trick is to listen to the people around you, but actually listen to it. And so that's I think really just being very, very authentic about the things that the things that you don't know, and then really helping people when they need help. And again, being like that, I kind of pride myself in a lot of ways on being that barrier between my team and some asks from clients that are unreasonable, or some asks from, our chief level staff that are unreasonable. I simply won't accept anything that puts the team in any type of distress or pain. And I think that's important, to have somebody that really does care, but actually cares, and is willing to take some hard knocks to make sure that at least they have what they need to have as much work-life balance as possible.
I completely agree with that too, and you mentioned collaboration and respect in there too, and that's something that, at Absorb we really try to focus on. So in one example, is when we scope new projects, we don't so Austin and I are the ones that typically put together our proposals. We never just scope them and send them off to the client. We always ask our internal team members, hey, does this look good to you? These are the amount of hours that we're expecting. Here are the kind of contingency things that we're looking at on this. We always run it past our internal members before we send anything off, because the worst thing that could possibly happen is, a client approves something, and if it's not correct on the internal side, then one, our internal team is going to be upset with us because now they are going to be expected to work within client expectations, which doesn't give us a good relationship with our internal team. Or the opposite side, we would have to tell the client, like, hey, we scoped this wrong and here's what it's actually going to be. And that doesn't look good on the client side either. So really being open and transparent and trying to collaborate with everyone, because, again, you also said that nobody is an expert. And that is so true that, you know, I- leadership positions, you have to kind of be in a position where you understand enough of everything that you can lead a project or you can lead a department. But in reality, you're not the laborer that's actually doing the hands-on work anymore. So as long as you have that foundational knowledge, you kind of understand how things work, things still change. So you should always be kind of getting that feedback and collaborating with the people that are doing the hands-on work so you can clearly set those expectations in the future. Now, you also have experience in agency environments. So I'm curious what the culture difference looks like between sort of an in-house design team and an agency design team, and what kind of shift in maybe quality or deliverables or anything have you seen sort of between those different environments?
Well, I think, agency environments, they're always a little bit more fast paced. They're always a little bit more stressful, because you do have, depending on the agency size or the agency culture, you do have a lot of tighter, deliverables that clients that are outside of your company rely on, right? Um, but the funny thing is, even sort of in an in-house situation, I always tend to think of the other departments as clients themselves because they are, right? Kind of anybody outside of the creative department is a client. Um, and so I like to treat them as such. Um, but just kind of taking that in-house element, the in-house creative teams, the benefit I would say is they're able to really dig into the brand or the brands that they're working with and then really get to know them intrinsically. They work with the same brands every day, and create not the same things, but they really know that brand book. Again, whether it's one brand or whether it's 4 brands or 10 brands, whatever it might be. And so, in my opinion, a lot of times that kind of creates this sense of expertise in and amongst the creative teams where they're like, gosh, I really, really know this brand. And sort of in juxtaposition with the agency side of things, there's this excitable element where creative teams are like, oh my gosh, I get to work with millions of brands and it's very, very cool. But, depending on the length of the client relationship, being able to really like sink their teeth into the brand, that doesn't happen quite as often. So in my opinion, I think even so, agency cultures, they need to spend a little bit more time um, really paying attention to that work-life balance because just by default, just by business structure, the environment is more stressful. You're dealing with I mean, hundreds of different types of personalities. I mean, you're dealing with clients that are really easygoing and that love everything, and then you're dealing with clients that don't like anything that you do. So it just there's like that kind of emotional malleability. I think that you need to work on if you're in a creative team in an agency setting, um, whereas opposed to an in-house team you kind of get to know the other teams and you're like, oh, similar to clients, I really like executing things for the sales department, or you know what, this other department, not a fan of. And you kind of get used to having that. But still the similarities are there. I mean, you've got, deliverable expectations. Really, I'll have to be honest, it really does come down to the company itself, and the leader as well. So there can be internal agencies that have incredible unrealistic expectations. In fact, I was just on a chat, but before we got together here, and one of my previous creative team members, they were mentioning that their in-house executive team had asked for a full featured brand awareness video in 2 weeks. Now, You and I know that that's impossible
Yeah.
because we're in the creative space and we've done this for a long time. But so that's the thing, right? Is that you can have those in-house companies that have incredibly demanding expectations from the creative team. And it does take somebody to say, listen, let me meet you at your level of knowledge here, and then let me educate you. And then it's up to them to kind of understand and to move around and for them to be a little bit malleable on their side. But I would say honestly, like I said, in general, agencies need to be more their cognizance of culture and having that true work-life balance needs to be elevated because of the demanding nature of the business.
I completely agree. Again, I feel like you're taking words right out of my mouth on this episode now. um, yeah, so another thing that we see on the agency side is, Absorb is an agency. Again, we don't like to call ourselves that because there's a stigma around that. But on the client side, there's an expectation of, because there's such a large stigma around what agencies are, on the client side, there's an expectation for the type of culture that this agency is going to have. So there's kind of a new trendy sort of thing, I guess, coming up where agencies are starting to claim that they have, different types of cultures, or they're claiming that they have work-life balance, and when in reality they don't. And we're seeing this a lot now in this agency world, is I think agencies are really starting to catch on to what clients are looking for, and they're trying to shift that, but a lot of agencies just aren't doing that well. Um, and, I know I've said this previously in this episode, but that really is something that we're trying to shift with Absorb, and we're really trying to put that work-life balance first, beforehand. And trying to balance that with client expectations is sometimes difficult, just because it is a very new thing in the agency world. Is, clients don't know how to work that way. Um, so there's this interesting shift in how to make and keep clients happy, and how to keep your internal team happy. But, to kind of reflect on what you said, agencies are extremely fast-paced environments, and that can very quickly lead to burnout. So I'm curious, if there were like a business owner or some kind of executive that may hear this conversation, and they may think to themselves, I need to rethink my whole team culture. I need to make our clients happier. Or, maybe it's someone that leads a creative team, and they want to kind of reflect on this and take action on it. How do you suggest they get started in that?
So I think that's, again, a wonderful question. And what I would say, the biggest piece of advice that I can give to anybody that is, looking at their team and saying, I wonder how things are going, or maybe building a team, exactly what you have mentioned. First of all, actually putting the team aside, I think that person needs to address their actual values. So as a leadership person, if revenue is your number one bottom line, and you have an issue with retention, and that really is your driving factor of becoming, or being an executive, um, you might have a hard time with your team base. If your value structure, and if you can kind of look at your value structure and say, maybe there's some room for maybe there's some room for adjustment here. Um, if your value structure allows you to actually put your people first, and in a very real way, where you are protective of that legitimate work-life balance, and you have to have some of those hard conversations with the clients and say, listen, we absolutely want to do everything we can for you. And with us having that work-life balance for our people, it is giving you the absolute best quality creative that we can possibly give, because, you know, our team members are showing up in the best way possible. Um, so I would say if your value structure as a leader allows you to legitimately and in a very real way put your people first, that will change everything, because then you'll start to look and see, oh my gosh, this designer's working 70 hours a week. Well, obviously, they're not going to give the client their best deliverable. Yeah, sure, we'll meet a deadline, but at what cost? Um, that sort of thinking will definitely never push an agency forward in any sort of meaningful way. They might grow revenue year after year, but they won't be doing things that are groundbreaking. They won't be reinventing the way that agencies treat people historically. And to your point about absorb, you know, I think one of the things, and part of the reason that agencies do have this stigma is because it's that thinking has been around for so long, right? Hey, you want something done quick. You might have an in-house creative team, but you want something done quick, go to an agency, they'll knock it out for you. But there are agencies like yours that do exist out there where instead of that fast turnaround time and that immense pressure, it's quality over deliverable time. And those are the true gems because you actually get that level of creativity from people that are so talented that you would never know. I mean, if you take the same people that work for Absorb and kind of transfer them overnight into an agency that is just turnkey and deliverable after deliverable, you wouldn't see their talent. You wouldn't see the talent for some of the amazing things that Absorb pulls out because they don't have that time and that space to actually create those things. So definitely, putting your people first, not just for the goal of increasing revenue, but for actually nourishing them and helping them to feel like, man, I'm part of something bigger and we're going to do things different. That is the best advice that I could give everyone.
I love that. And, thank you for mentioning absorb in there as well. I'm glad that you can kind of see what we're attempting to do here, what we're trying to achieve. And I will say too that, you know, just because we are focusing on quality over quantity of work doesn't mean that our work is slow. We can still deliver fast and deliver well, but we have already seen a trend that all of our best quality deliverables are the ones that we were able to take more time on, or we had more space to kind of work with the client and create a better sort of feedback loop in there. So, um, we need to be wrapping up this episode, and I'm so sorry for this, but I'm curious. One last thing: do you have any kind of key takeaways or recommendations to ensure that a culture will stick within a company?
I would say it probably goes back to that feedback element. So really, what one creative might like is not necessarily something that another creative will like. As a really small, quick example, one of the things that I started doing in Room was a creative spark plug where, I kind of gathered all the feedback from my team members, and they're like, I really want to be creative, but not all of the Room projects allow me to do that. So we took, a half hour every week, and it was a space to not have anything to do with Room or its deliverables, but for those folks to actually be creative. Now, I didn't think that this thing was going to work out. I like, there's probably a big possibility that my team is going to be like, Jess, you're ridiculous, and this is not great. But they actually, it turns out they really liked it, but I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have known, first of all, the need for it, but I also wouldn't have known if it's something we should keep around if I didn't genuinely ask them, what do you feel about it? Because if you hate it, just tell me and we'll get rid of it. Um, and that's something that I took with me to this job. And it's things like that when every team is different, every culture is different, but when you kind of start off on the right foot as a leader, and you know what your goal is, again, mine to create confidence and create a really harmonious culture as much as possible. You can shape everything else around that, but you don't lose sight of it, regardless of what that particular company's culture is. So there's an element of being true to yourself. There's a feedback element. And then there's honestly, just try it out. Don't be afraid to try things because things will flop. 100%. I've done so many things that my team is like, this, I never want to do this again. Actually, this is horrible. And that's good because I know that. But yeah, be brave, try things out, and then don't just listen to yourself for feedback.
I love it. What a great takeaway. All right, well, thank you, Jess. This has been an incredible conversation. I'm so glad that you were able to speak on this topic today. For all of our listeners, I want to give a shameless plug here. Jess does not know that I am doing this. So, Jess is on the board of directors of a 501c3 nonprofit that is actually a rabbit rescue called Every Bunny Counts. So for any of our listeners that may be interested in Jess and more of her story, I would encourage you to look up Every Bunny Counts and see, if there's anything that you could do to support their cause. Jess, do you have anything that you'd like to say? Maybe plug your social accounts or anything like that before we head out?
No, not at all, except for thank you for that. And it was such a pleasure. I've really, I've really enjoyed having this conversation today. And I think the world of what Absorb is doing. And of course, you personally, and it was just wonderful to kind of, talk about how things can change for the better. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.